In many ways, it's over for the middle class, right? And in many ways, it makes sense why they're giving up. Many people in the middle class, they're giving up on buying a property, having a family, getting married, all these type of typical things you would consider. Even some going on holiday, they're just kind of sacrificing that, buying higher quality food, typical middle class things. Many people are giving up on because of the inflation, the lack of job security, and so on. So let's listen to a few examples of people in the middle class who are really struggling. And I hope you can relate to this, and we'll try and find some solutions in this video.
Gen Z doesn't agree that $74,000 is middle class. No kidding, it's not even close. Check this out. If you take $74,000 for a Gen Zer, let's say they have a bachelor's degree and they're 25 years old. First of all, $74,000 is much higher than the average income. Most Gen Zers are probably making anywhere from 40 to 50, maybe 60, but let's use 74. The take home after taxes, 401k, and health insurance is $4,300. The average college monthly payment on a loan is about $500. You're down to $3,800. Let's say this person is financially responsible, decides to split a 2-bedroom apartment in a medium-sized city like Orlando, so that their payment is $1,200 a piece, $200 for utilities, so $1,400. Now, unless they're going to have Lucky Charms and peanut butter and jelly, their groceries are going to cost about $600 if they're trying to get chicken, beef, and some healthy stuff. You have a $400 car payment, $200 in insurance, $150 for gas, $100 for a cell phone, leaves you with $950. This is no savings, investment, no emergency fund. Let's give them at least $300 to go on a couple dates or to hang out with their friends for the month so they can enjoy life a little bit. They're left with only $650. A bachelor's degree, $74K salary. You are splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with a friend and only have $650 left a month. It would take you years to save up the $30,000 that you would need for a down payment on a house with the closing costs. But even if you could get that down payment saved, you would still need to make $120,000 a year to be considered for a $400,000 loan. The middle class, the goalpost has been moved from $70K to $120,000.
This is completely accurate. Now, I myself have dealt with this. If you are new to the channel, I've worked at Goldman's, Morgan Stanley, many other finance companies for over 10 years in the investment banking department. And this analysis is accurate, right? And this is something I would often say when I was working at some of these places, where I would just essentially say, hold on, there's no middle class anymore. And people would just say, well, the middle class is a bit smaller, but it still exists. I see the middle class as kind of not existing, right? And I do see them as in a really big economic crisis. Now, having a 120K salary, if you can look up the statistics, there's not that many people who are on 6-figure salaries. Average salary, I think in America is around 40,000, and in the UK, it's around a similar amount. 35,000. Not many people are on that salary level, and I'm sure some of you are watching this. You may be working in finance or tech, consulting, accounting, things like that. You're probably on the slightly higher salaries, but you can see how high the expenses are and why the middle class, particularly the younger generations of the middle class, are giving up. It shows you how high these expenses are. I've studied at LSE, as I mentioned here, and I did an economics degree. Many of you probably went to university or college where you had to pay significant amounts. And then the loan is quite massive, right? So this guy's mentioning a loan of $500 payment each month. Then you got $1,400 on housing. That's your rent cost, your mortgage cost, perhaps. Food is also expensive because of the inflation right now. Then you got car costs, gas, cell, fun, and what's left over, right? So these expenses are quite high compared to how much they're making, right? If they're earning 74K. People are really struggling right now. And this is why the middle class has to make really significant life sacrifices in one way or another. And when I say life sacrifices, I'm not talking about what goes on behind the scenes of Hollywood and certain politicians. When I say life sacrifices, what I mean is taking some career advice, whether it's from me, or really reconsidering their life in terms of what decisions are they going to make. Are they going to make some kind of decision where they decide not to buy a house, not to have a family, maybe not to get married? Maybe they're going to do those things, but live off grid in a low cost of living location, homeschool their kids so they don't have to put them in a private school to get good education. There's all these type of expenses and things that you need to consider and plan your life in a more sustainable, independent way of the system. Maybe saving a ton of money in your 20s, so in your 30s you do have that bit more of life flexibility. These are the type of real lifestyle decisions you need to make, because living and working in a high cost of living area like London, New York, places like that, it doesn't pay off that much over the long term unless you've got some kind of exit plan. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to listen to another example of these type of scenarios and how to deal with them.
You want to know why the middle class is dying? I think the biggest reason is because cost of living keeps going up, but everybody's ability to make income keeps staying the same. So the middle class is being swallowed up into a poverty class. Because the average income for an American-born citizen is $56,000 a year. $56,000 a year! And I think that's before taxes too. So you're only taking home maybe like $48,000. That's $4,000 a month. I mean, most people's rent is $1,000 or $1,200 a month. How do people even survive off of that? That's poverty. So that's one of the reasons why the middle class is dying, because it's turning into a poverty class.
So this guy's got some great points here, right? As I say, middle class in decline. Many of the middle class are being removed. They're being pushed down into the poverty class. The average cost of the average income is not that high. He mentions around 56,000, and the rent, of course, is the biggest cost there. So one thing I'd advise people, if you are watching this and you are in the middle class, figure out what your biggest cost is, which probably is your rent or your mortgage, and consider if you want to downsize that to kind of take yourself out of that higher cost of living area, so you can save more money, invest it, and retire early if possible. The other thing to consider is, if you're in America, you can move to a lower cost of living state. If you are close to a state lines, consider if you're working from home. If you're in Chicago, maybe you can move across the border to like a more lower cost of living state, and consider that as a potential option. So there are many different ways to consider your way out of this trap that you're being put in, right? Lots of people want to blame it on, corporate greed and things, which we'll see moving forward. But we can't control like the corporations, the government. We need to find personal solutions that work for us. And don't get caught up in this trap that's being laid out for you deliberately by the powers that be, that want to keep you essentially one step away from poverty by thinking, oh, you got to keep playing the game, work your 9 to 5, work your 9 to 5, pay that high rent, stay in the office, and you have to be in a high cost of living area to travel to the office each day. You need to find a loophole that works for you so you don't get caught up like the rest of the middle class.
Single graph should tell you everything you need to know about why the middle class is being gutted and failing. The short answer is unregulated corporate greed. The average CEO pay has gone up 1,000% since the 80s. And look at the typical worker pay. You can barely even see that line. It's increased about 10% adjusted for inflation. If you're making minimum wage or lower, it's worth less now than it's ever before. Minimum wage has effectively not increased since 80 years ago. Middle wage and lower wage earners have essentially not seen an increase in their pay since '79. Meanwhile, corporate profits have continued to rise. What we're seeing is an absolute failure to tax corporate profits and allow corporate greed to go absolutely unchecked in an unregulated capitalist system. Problems that exist in America's society today is not caused by the most recent moral panic you see on the news.
Couple points here, right? So firstly, there is an element of corporate greed, inflation, where companies are raising their prices regardless of the real rate of inflation just to milk more money out of you. There are many CEOs in this kind of upper middle class, the 1%, who are getting paid way more money than you are, and their income and their investments due to the inflation also, the assets they own are increasing dramatically, the property they own, the investments in the stock market, all of these things are being inflated by the printing of money, by central banks, which are creating inflation. You're not earning as much money, or if you get a salary rise from one company to the next, a 20% salary rise, that'll be eroded by the rate of inflation within a couple years. So it's kind of like you get a pay rise, but then inflation erodes it. So if you are making money, and I'm not giving any investment advice or any finance advice now, consider your investments. Consider, okay, cool, if the government keeps printing money and the stock market's going to keep going up, it might go up and down a little, but it's going up over the next 5 to 10 years. Should you put your money in the stock market in a broad-based index fund like VU or VTI, right? If the inflation is going to continue, the banks and the powers that be might manipulate the price of gold, but maybe buying physical gold makes sense because that's going to maintain its value as inflation continues to go up. Maybe invest in Bitcoin, which is considered an inflation hedge, even though if it doesn't act like that when you look at the price sometimes. But options outside the system to kind of invest your money in, rather than playing along with the standard system, and not getting too caught up with of course you need to maximize your income through salary rises, pay rises, promotions, and things like that. But I think climbing the corporate ladder or trying to make it to the next level and thinking, okay, cool, well, I'm going to get $5,000 pay rise if I do extra work. How much is that $5,000 really going to impact you if you don't manage it in an effective way? Like, not just a high interest savings account, but investing it in the right way that makes sense, like a long-term sustainable investment, even if it's just bonds, like government bonds that pay you 4 to 5% or more, things like that. So just really thinking carefully how you can escape that type of scenario you're being pushed into as the middle class. So if you're in the middle class, consider what compromises make sense to you. There are many people out there who dealing with job layoffs and in an unstable job market, but they're still going ahead and having multiple kids. They're not planning ahead, like, and they afford to have 2, 3, 4 kids. They're just like, oh, I really want to have kids, but then maybe you can only really afford 1 or 2 kids. Then maybe don't have 4 kids if you can't afford it, and think the government's going to bail you out, because maybe they are now, but over time those type of restrictions on government benefits can come in. Even if you're a woman with kids, a single mother with kids, you never know, the government might drop out and say they don't want to pick up the bill for that. So really think carefully about making those big life decisions that do cost quite a lot of money. So that's the key takeaway for anyone watching this right now. If you're in the middle class, think carefully before any big financial decisions. I provide career advice for anyone who's interested on overcoming some of these major challenges you might deal with in your life financially, and your career in this particular unstable career environment. If you're interested, the link's in the description. Reach out to me, we can have a discussion. And there are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now. I'll see you next time.